Andre Ivory, who we're about to hear from, is the Education Director at Congregation Ort Zion in Scottsdale, Arizona. He serves as the Director of the Raz Gadel Religious School and Director of Adult Education. And his area of expertise is diversity within the Jewish community, youth and teen education, and social action. Andre also serves as a board member of the Center for Jewish Philanthropy, formerly the Jewish Federation of Greater Phoenix, and the Arizona Hockey Association's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Recently, Andre has been part of communal conversations about relationships that can be built between the Jewish and the Black communities, especially in light of the recent comments by Kanye West. Andre dedicates his work to communicating the constant principle of treating everyone as a unique creation of God, hoping to install this in all aspects of Jewish life. And just on a personal note, Andre has been a very good friend of mine since his work and our work together at Camp Ramah in Canada. And I know frequent visits many years ago to Cleveland as part of a youth partnership with the congregation he worked for in Toronto. And we're very excited to have him here in Cleveland. For those who are joining, he will also be with our Shabbaton, Shabbat on the Circle this Shabbat. But from B'nai Yeshurun, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Andre Ivory.
Ta-da, here I am. After numerous cups of coffee today, I am here. When you take a red eye in, and the person sitting next to you on the plane who, for the sake of this class, should be identified as vegetable lasagna, decides not only to sit in his seat, but to attempt to sit in yours at the same time for the duration of almost a 4-hour flight to Chicago. Not much sleep is going to get done. The least he could have done was at least buy me dinner before the plane took off, but that didn't happen. But I've had a number of cups of coffee, and I'm actually really happy to be presenting on this topic this evening. You all are actually getting a preview of a class that I'm going to be teaching at my home congregation in Scottsdale, Arizona, after Passover. So there are a bunch of people in Scottsdale, Arizona who are really mad at me right now for even starting this subject before I've had a chance to start it with them. But it really is something, I love comedy, and I love the ability to at times be able to laugh at life, because sometimes it is one of the greatest coping measures that we have, is the ability to laugh. When I feel down, the first thing I do is try to, put on a comedy film, some of my favorites over time, to give myself an opportunity to feel levity again, to take, at least for a moment of laughter, to take some of life's weight off of my shoulders. We have in our office at Congregation Ort Zion, we have sometimes a propensity to do this, because in the way we serve our community, sometimes does carry a lot of emotional weight, especially when a loved one in our community is lost. And our community has definitely suffered some of those, and some very strong ones, including the loss of one of our beloved rabbis just a few years ago. We wanted to turn to laughter to help us also cry at the same time. Now, over the years, one of my favorite shows has been Seinfeld, the show that ran from 1989 all the way till 1998, and has made more money in syndication than it ever did as an actual show on the air, and now has made tens of millions, even more, by it being its syndication rights being bought, or its rights in general being bought out by Netflix, and you can now view the entirety of all the seasons of Seinfeld on Netflix. I know the question you're wanting to ask: have I watched all of the seasons in a binge watching session sometime over like last summer? The answer is obvious, and I won't bore you with the details of how long it took, or how many bags of popcorn or other various snack foods were consumed in the process of completing such a task. But Seinfeld itself is such a unique creation, not only in television history, but I feel, and I'm going to, in our discussion tonight, discuss why it's such an important thing in the Jewish world, and some of the Jewish lessons, not just higher levels of the clown episode with George in the fire in the kitchen, and talking about what Jewish moral lessons we can gain from that. But one of the key things that we gain from Seinfeld itself is from Jewish sources, from its authorship, its authors teaching us that laughter is an important concept, and revelry is an important concept in the Jewish world, in our Jewish way of understanding how the Jewish world works and even how the greater world works. Originally, Seinfeld was sold by Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld as a show that was supposed to be about, you can say it all with me, nothing. It was supposed to be a show about nothing. But ultimately, the show is about everything. And one of its greater lessons is teaching us how to be able to laugh at just about everything that happens, that there is a comedic side to everything. And Larry David, in a lot of ways, takes this lesson from one of his big inspirations, a man who in his own right is the Jewish Jewish comedians of Jewish comedians, and teaching us the great lesson of Jewish comedy and through a lens of life. And that is Mel Brooks, where Mel Brooks would sit down and ask the question when he was writing his films. By the way, my favorite is High Anxiety. I love that film. He would ask the question about things that were going on in his life. Is it funny? Is it funny? And Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld took upon this task of asking the question, is our lives funny? And ultimately, our lives are very funny when we step back and take a look at things and are able to see things through a different lens. Yes, our lives are tragic and they're complicated and they're full of details. But sometimes when we take a step back to take the weight off, we should step back and say our lives are pretty funny. There's a lighter side to all of this. Now I'm going to open up, and I don't want this to just be an hour of me talking. I hear enough of that in my own head when I'm sitting in my office during the course of the day. I want to open up the floor and start our discussion by asking this question. Who, and I assume that everyone here is a Seinfeld watcher, whether it be from the start, its original start. I mean, when it originally started, I was only 10 years old. So my parents weren't going to allow me to watch such things. I caught on to Seinfeld when it hit syndication. So I'm going to ask the question, and please use the raise your hand function in Zoom and in the chat. Let me know who is your favorite Seinfeld character. I'm going to open this with mine, and I'm going to give the reason why. From a young child that I was, yesterday was my birthday, and I'm 44 years old, and it feels like I was a child like yesterday, but people keep reminding me that it was quite a long time ago. Thank you, Rachel, for the birthday wishes. And I remember listening to Jerry Stiller, old radio shows of Jerry Stiller, from the 50s and 60s. So always when I watch Seinfeld, I look for episodes with one character, even if it's a short appearance, and that is by Frank Costanza. Frank Costanza, in my mind, is exactly what it reminds me a lot of my father and my grandfather, who I, through the eyes of me as a kid, I thought that these were the most eccentric people I've ever come across, who had these like funny rules about things that I could never comprehend, and nobody else on earth comprehended these things. Frank Costanza also reminds me of how at times indignant my father was about even my smallest things would tick him off, and he would go and do something, just in spite of something, just to make a point. And I always laughed the hardest. In fact, for a while, my answering message on my phone was the famous Frank Costanza line where he picks up when he's arguing with Jerry's parents about, who's going to move to the Costanzas want to go to Florida and move into Del Boca Vista, but the Seinfelds don't want them there. And they think they're trying to keep him out. And Frank Costanza calls, Jerry's parents on the phone and leaves, hello, this is Frank Costanza. You think you're going to keep us out of Del Boca Vista? And he goes, that was my answering message. So when people called me, they got this message from Frank Costanza, and they would laugh, of course, because it's funny, to answer Mel Brooks' question, is it funny? And it's funny. So my favorite is Frank Costanza. Who are some of yours? George, Rachel, why George?
He just reminds me of so many people that I know, particularly one fellow that I used to work with, who was an engineer, who just, I don't know, the fact that he tried so much harder to get out of doing any work than to actually do the work. He just seems to me, even though his name is Costanza, he just seems like the Jewish Nevish.
Mm-hmm. The character of George Costanza was mostly loosely modeled after Larry David himself. Larry David took some of the trials and tribulations of his own life and fed them into George Costanza. And if you look at some of the things that George complains about, he's a middle-aged balding man who can't get relationships right, and of course is trying, as you correctly stated, Rachel, was trying to get out of doing work, any amount of work, trying to get it easy, was something that Larry David was projecting out to all of us through the character of George Costanza mostly. Originally, George was supposed to be, and the Costanzas themselves were supposed to be, an overtly Jewish family, but they scaled back the character a little bit and the characters a little bit to just make them seem like somewhat of a like a general sort of kind of New Yorker kind of family. Rachel, you had something else you wanted to add?
I love the scene we would mention about trying to get a girl, where he was in, maybe this is not for Scholl, but he was in bed, he had the Yankees on and he was eating a pastrami sandwich all at the same time.
Yes.
He had a trifecta. He was so concerned about his own pleasure.
Yes.
Getting out of work, and it just, he was, I don't know, he's my favorite character.
Or coming up with sort of kind of these grandiose plans, like how to, like the episode where he and Jerry try to figure out how to do the roommate switch with the girlfriend, how to get the roommate to switch on to Jerry, and they spend these hours at the coming up with the perfect plan to get the roommate to switch over to Jerry. I often joke in my office about sleeping under my desk.
On the desk, yeah.
and actually I can sleep under my desk if I want to. And I always think of that. Cindy, please.
I'm going to continue with George. The thing that I like about him a lot is, and I'm always quoting this, is going out on a Costanza.
Yeah.
Going out on a high point. And I just see so much of that in the world where people will be working, whether it's athletes or people and they're really doing well in their career. And they should retire at that point, their high point, but they keep on working and keep on working and keep on working. And all of a sudden they're on a downslide. And that's when they go out. Well, I always tell them, let's go out on a Costanza, you know. So that's one of my favorite things about them.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you. Sheila.
Were the Costanzas supposed to be Jewish? Were they Jewish, or, I mean?
It was always the only, I mean, there are a few characters in the show who we know 100% for sure are Jewish. Jerry's family, 100% we know are Jewish, but it was always kind of left up to this kind of fog on whether or not George's family was Jewish. And the Festivus episode is a perfect example of that they're kind of counter everything. They're not really in a lane, really. They're kind of their own thing. They're kind of their own idea, but wrapped up in this kind of really extreme version of what a stereotypical, we're going to talk about stereotypes a little bit later, because it's what this stereotypical New Yorker was supposed to be like. And originally Jerry Stiller is not the first casted person to be George Costanza. Jerry Stiller actually doesn't come in to be Frank Costanza until the end and the beginning of the end of the third season, beginning of the fourth season. There was actually somebody else who was casted to be George Costanza and came in these bit cameo spots in the first two seasons. And Jerry Stiller fit, when you think about sort of kind of what you would think somebody's grandiose New Yorker father would look like, Jerry Stiller fits that in every, and even so much so that even when Seinfeld ends and Jerry Stiller moves on to his character on The King of Queens, it's the exact same character he's playing. He's playing, but just by a different name. He's playing the eccentric New York, extreme New Yorker, extreme Brooklyn, father, and he was playing the exact same role because that he just fit it and hit it out the park so well. And I think it's kind of hidden a little bit that it was. I think that's intentional by Larry David, because so much of the Costanzas were modeled after his own experiences as a kid and as a young adult and as a young writer. And in his early, a lot of it was modeled after his early days of writing on Saturday Night Live. Anyone else want to share a character? No Kramer fans. My good friend Davey Rosen would say, Rabbi Davey Rosen would say Kramer all the way, our Cosmo. When I remember the episode when his first name was revealed by his mother, who worked at the diner, revealed what his first name was, and everybody was shocked that it was Cosmo. And here is just an amazing character that was put together. Just sort of kind of we all have that sort of kind of avant-garde friend who just kind of does things that are just a little off the normal path. And then of course the whole show and the characters on the show are also a great discussion on the meaning of friendships. I mean, we remember the episode where Elaine gets new friends that look just like that just look just like Jerry, Kramer and George, but they go by different names, but they all act the same way. There's so many wonderful lessons within the show, in a show that was supposed to be about nothing, and it really is about something. So I want to jump in to thank you all for the Bizarro friends. This is I remember that friend, because I always joke with my friends sometimes, like, what are you going to do? Go get new friends that look just like us, and it's like a challenge. But I want to jump in and start comparing some of what we discussed and remember from the show to elements of our own Judaism that we often come across. I'm one of those weird Jewish nerds who always kind of sees Judaism, in almost every part of the world, and no less, so than in Seinfeld. And in thinking about what lessons Seinfeld is trying to teach us, I did, of course, turn to what our texts tell us. And one of the amazing things that the show really gives us, and George is a perfect example of this, is the comedy and the humor of self-deprecation that we sometimes understand. We give humor to things and not as a way of belittling ourselves, but understanding it as a reverse way of humility, self-deprecation. And one of the greatest examples in sort of looking at this, I kind of look at some scenes in the Torah as if it happened in a Seinfeld episode. Like, what would it be if it were I either look at it through two lenses, if it were on a Seinfeld episode, or if it were, the new History of the World is out, History of the World Part 2. Like, what would it look like if Mel Brooks wrote this scene? And one of the scenes I come to that immediately teaches us about laughter is Avraham and Sarah greeting the Shalosh Malachim. And do you want to put it up? You could put it up here. There we go. Yeah, this guy knows what he's doing. You hired the right rabbi here. You got a guy who's a keeper. So in this scene, now picture it happening in Jerry's apartment, and Avraham and Sarah are sitting around, and like Kramer comes in with like two, let's say they're the cable install guys who happen to be this, yes, you're getting another Rabbi Josh. You liked Rabbi Josh so much, you're getting another Rabbi Josh. That's the comment in the comment section. Just imagine that Kramer comes in with the two cable repair guys, and they're the Shalosh Malachim, or they come the dry cleaner family, that Jerry went to, and they say to Elaine, you're gonna have a kid at a year from now. What would Elaine's response be? Her key line in the whole show.
Is he sponge worthy?
Sponge worthy.
No, that's not what you're looking for. Okay.
She would put her hands out and push the other person. And what was her key line?
Get out.
Get out. Get out. Like, as a way of not believing like anything that you're saying. And in this scene, Sarah is told, you're advanced in years, but you're going to bear a child. And what is her response? She laughs. And she goes on to this course of self-deprecation. Now that I've lost, the ability, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? Not only does she self-deprecate herself, but she then goes on to say, look at this old fart over here. He can't do anything about it. And then she's asked, why does she laugh? And then she tries to brush it off and says, no, I really didn't laugh. But the angel says, no, you did. And of course, what does she name the kid? Yitzchak. It's like something completely out of, like, you could really see this in some sort of comedic sketch, even though deep down underneath it, there is tremendous meaning on multiple different levels in this scene right here. From the ability to, Sarah says earlier that having a child, she will be built up through having a child. And that is a call and a cry out to women and fertility issues and what it means to start and build a family, and what it means to parents, what it means to individuals, what it means to mothers to connect to children. But this part itself seems very weird. We're allowed at this very interesting moment, Sarah allows herself one of the best emotions that the human body allows us to have, and that is laughter. She looks at these angels, these messengers of God, and says, "Are you nuts? Like, what is wrong with you? Like, aren't you paying attention to what's going on here?" And of course, their part and on behalf of Hashem is, look, we're doing God, I could see this out of Melbourne. We're doing God's work here. Like, it's good to be, it's good to be the ruler, if these are the angels. But this is a moment where Sarah allows herself to react in a very natural and very human way, in a very self-deprecating way. I'm too old for this. Can't you see? I'm too old for this. I can't do this. You may believe it, but I can't. I won't allow it, myself to believe it. And then, of course, we can back out of the screen share for a moment. We also ask ourselves, one of the things that Seinfeld does as a show is, if it's a show about nothing, it certainly did tackle and make a lot of jokes about things that today would never make it into a sitcom, never would make it into a sitcom. And we come across that in a lot of classic comical productions. I always say to myself, and to others, Blazing Saddles would be a movie that would never be allowed to be made today. Never. It wouldn't even make it out of the writers would stop halfway through because they know that it would never get anywhere out past that room. There are a lot of Seinfeld episodes that make insults to people that would never, and even Larry David took it to the extreme when he was allowed to do it on cable television with Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's a lot of borderline comedy, things that we ask ourselves, that's kind of risky. Should I laugh at that? The Mel Brooks, is it funny? Is it funny? Can any of you think of a moment in a Seinfeld episode that would be a piece of comedy that maybe either you were hesitant to laugh at because you felt it either insulted another group, insulted you personally, or was just would be too borderline today? Cindy.
The skits that he did with Babu, the Pakistani cafe or restaurant guy.
Yes.
A lot. I mean, we laughed at it, but it was kind of like the cringing kind of laugh. It was making fun of him and his nationality.
Yes.
So,
yes.
yeah.
Tybal, please.
So first, I happen to have a virtual background on the shelf that I'm going to show in your honor. Because unless it's old person hearing Arizona and hockey, I assume it's ice and not field, but
100%.
there you go. Okay.
Thank you.
Again, I'm not a watcher, but I heard about this and I was really disturbed. As a certified Yad Vashem Shoah educator, the use of the word Nazi in Soup Nazi. And I understood as you're doing it, but it trivialized, it's the trivialization, it's the non-understanding of uniqueness to me. I understand, I think I understand that people found it funny, the whole thing of the control, but and again, not a watcher, but that bothered me hearing about it.
And that, and in a lot of ways, I would agree with you, and thank you for the virtual background tribute, that there are these moments that trivialize. I feel it even sometimes, even as a Black man, sometimes comedy in shows trivializes, the experiences of Black people. and of course the trivialization of the word Nazi, the constant use of it, and just it sort of kind of being diluted through its constant use, and therefore losing its what lesson it should be teaching us is important. And in fact, the guy who owned the soup shop, who was called the Soup Nazi, ended up suing the show over the popularity and the constant. I mean, I've been to the place in Manhattan where the spot where the soup shop was, and you know, the guy ended up being so, you know, everyone would come in and call him the Soup Nazi, when it wasn't something that he wanted. Of course, Rachel, making out during Schindler's List, that's always been a very borderline. I 100% agree with that. It's always been a very borderline sketch to me in the show that they should have potentially left that one out. I was always against that one. Sheila.
I think a lot of this stuff is since I'm a New Yorker, I see it very differently. And calling him a soup Nazi, and maybe it's also the time we're much more sensitive today.
Yeah.
We're ultra sensitive. And it hit the nail on the head calling him a soup Nazi. Now I feel sorry for the guy. Yeah, he did suffer. I know. I never passed the store, but my kids used to. When they were at school, they went by there. And I think what was acceptable when Seinfeld started out is not acceptable now. And in fact, but the interesting thing is that the jokes that they tell now they're not funny.
I mean,
They don't
look,
hit us the same way, maybe because they're talking about different people. Maybe Jews like to make fun of themselves, and therefore it's funny.
you think about, let's take Larry David out for a second and insert Norman Mailer, or insert you know, do you think a show like do you think a character like Archie Bunker would ever be allowed? I mean, I know they tried to redo it, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. Archie Bunker was intentionally insightful and insulting. And
I found him more obnoxious than
yeah, I mean,
Seinfeld.
but the thing about Archie Bunker's character is that it was purposeful for the message that the show was trying to send. At the end of every episode, Archie, most of the time, I guess I can't say every episode, most of the time had some sort of revelation, some sort of minor revelation that brought him around to whatever difficulty. And generally it was done through who was perceived to be the least intelligent character, right? Usually the lesson was learned through his wife, right? And she was always the teacher, and that was done on purpose. But we had to sort of kind of cringe because we would watch Archie Bunker and be like, I can't, like, why did he say that? And he would directly, the language was not held back. I remember watching some episodes of, you know, of All in the Family and be like, wow, that language, that comes borderline to the 5 things you can't say on television, you know, you know, and it would become very borderline. But there were things in Seinfeld episodes that would bother us. And we have to go back to the original question and ask ourselves, is it funny? Is it funny? And let's take a look at another quote that I'm going to use.
Does it make us as Jews more aware of some of the things we shouldn't be doing or saying?
That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question, Sheila. I think, in my opinion, sometimes, I can't say sometimes, controversy always, as an educator, is a teachable moment if you seize upon it. Taking the Archie Bunker example, if it makes us more aware, then what's the follow-up? what's the next question or the next lesson that could be taught after that? And I think sometimes in episodes of Seinfeld, it gets us to laugh about something and then ask a question, and then maybe there's a further discussion that you have amongst your friends about what that meant. And that all comes to a head actually in the final episode of the what people thought was disappointing, the final Seinfeld episode. You know, that they come to learn how insulting they were. And Eric, to your point a little bit, Archie Bunker's lesson happened at the end of each episode. Seinfeld, it didn't happen at the end of each episode. And I think that's the point of the final show episode, is that they came to learn these lessons that they were just, while they were talking about nothing, they should have learned their lesson, that they should have been more attentive to what was going on around them, that they were kind of living in a silo and not caring about other people, when really they should have, the one thing that they should have paid attention to was how their actions and words affected other people. But when
That makes it very teachable.
very teachable. Look, not everybody gets the lesson immediately. Not everybody understands the moral of every show. As a kid, I used to watch the show, and maybe I'm aging myself, the show Highway to Heaven. If you remember that show with who played the angel?
Michael Landon.
Yeah, Michael Landon. And I would watch this show, and like, there would be a moral of the story, and I'd sit with my parents and we'd talk about what the moral of the story was. And that was sort of hit you over the head with the moral. This was, you know, in some of these shows, these are meant to laugh at first and be like, oh, wait a minute, what does that mean? Yes. Yes. So the book of Ecclesiastes is a book that is really, I mean, outside of the one famous part, you know, that we unfortunately hear often at funerals, is a book about asking, it's like, what is it all, the overarching question of Kohelet is like, what is it all worth if we're all going to die anyway, if it's all meant to come to an end? And here it says, you know, come, I will treat you with merriment, taste mirth. That too I found was futile. All right, we try to enjoy the great things in life, and okay, all right, they're short-lived, but in the end, we all kind of come to an end. Of revelry, I said, it's mad. Of merriment, what good is that? I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine and to grasp folly, while letting my mind direct with wisdom, to the end that I might learn which of the two was better for men to practice in the few days of life they have under heaven. Now, we can sit here and say, yeah, all right, we can either laugh at some things that offend us, that don't offend us, and don't laugh at things that do offend us. But sometimes on that borderline edge, it's okay to laugh in the moment and learn the lesson and have a wait a minute, why did I laugh at that? Do I have a problem with it? Do the further analysis. Sometimes merriment and laughter and revelry can lead to something more fruitful than just laughing and passing the moment by. I often think that this is the point often of sometimes what Mel Brooks was trying to tell us all along. I think that was the point of Blazing Saddles. Blazing Saddles is an incredibly offensive film, but I think he was trying to get us to have a discussion about why some of these things are so offensive. But in the moment, we laughed at it. I'm not being passive or flippant about the overall issue. I'm just saying sometimes this levity is the word I'm trying to look for as the coffee kicks in for the second round, that sometimes this levity does lead to important lessons being learned, serious lessons being learned at very important times. But it serves as to use an educator's expression, it serves to be the hook, the set induction for what it is that we're trying to ultimately learn. It got our attention, and now we're able to see some of the value and not just let it pass by. We can back out of this. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And in this last part, in the few minutes, and I want to open it up to questions in a few minutes. What are the purpose of the people who are trying to give us this gift of laughter? What is the point of laughter? What can we gain from it? It is important in Judaism, and Judaism does call upon us to have moments of levity and laughter. I always think of whatever I have the privilege and the honor of families allowing me to lead a Shiva minyan, or to visit a family in the moments of trying to learn more about their loved ones before a funeral. One thing always, there's a common thing that seems to happen when I ask them to open up about their favorite memories of their loved one. Sometimes people tell a funny story because that's the way they want to remember the people who they love. They want to remember the good times, the laughter, the joy, something funny they always did. And that's generally one of the prompt questions I usually ask is, tell me something, because usually in the rotation that we have at our congregation, I get one of the latter nights of Shiva, of sitting Shiva. And by then, as some of you may know, when you get, and I know this from personal experience myself of sitting Shiva, that when you get to those final nights of sitting Shiva and you've shared so much, like you can't cry, and like you're kind of, you've cried out, you've sorrowed out. And I always asked them to tell a funny story. Tell me the funniest moment that they remember about the one that they love. And you can see, as I use the expression, the flowers bloom in those moments. You really get a beautiful sense of the person who they're remembering. Laughter is an essential part of our Jewish existence, and we're allowed to enjoy it, to enjoy the people who give us moments of levity and laughter and joy. It may seem like nothing, like moments of nothingness, but it's sometimes funny. It's sometimes funny. How many of you have ever sat in the middle of a room or on a train or on a bus or in your car by yourself, and you just start laughing for no reason whatsoever because something came across your mind and you just can't stop laughing? Or you see something that seems mundane and you laugh. You can't, there's something you found about it that was funny. I mean, hopefully it was at an appropriate time. You didn't laugh at, but you found something that was funny. In this last bit that we get from the Tanaim, that we get from a discussion, an experience. Good question, Michael. Does it make a difference in our reaction if the offensive joke sketches are written by Jews? I'm going to leave that. Actually, let's back out of this. I'm going to leave that. I want to open it up for discussion because I've had a lot of discussion about this. Not just from a Jewish perspective. Are jokes about Black people funnier when they come from Black people? And are we allowed to laugh at them? I was discussing this on a panel discussion with a couple of friends and former colleagues about do jokes about the Jewish community or any ethnic group, are they funnier when they come from that? Are we allowed to laugh at them when they come from that ethnic group? Tybal, please.
Just a question, if you have a reaction. You may be, or just to explain, too young to know about, he came from an immigrant family, Norman Cousins, who wrote a book a long time ago about laughing consciously every day to help with medical problems.
Mm-hmm.
But he was someone who found the Three Stooges funny, and that's not my taste at all.
Yeah.
So I have a librarian friend who's finding comedians for me to watch to laugh every day. And she found someone for me that I think I can watch his over and over again, but there's one that to me is a little on the edge, and that's Gary Goldman. Do you know Gary Goldman?
Yeah.
And do you know his bit about, forget how he words it, but something like, oh, I come from like a segment of the Jewish community that's no one's ever heard of. And he waits and then he says, poor Jews. And yes, he's very Jewish. And yes, all these other things that he does that I love. And he's tackled his own depression. And I mean, amazing things. But that's like this nod to me about this anti-Semitic trope. That's the one thing that doesn't sit well. And I just wondered if you or anyone else knew Gary Goldman stuff in general and how to react.
You know, it's, you know, we tend to, in our modern day discussions about limits of speech, where is the acceptable range of speech? Comedy is an incredible part of that debate on whether or not comedy is just plain out being offensive or whether or not it's trying to reveal an underlying truth. And this was part of our discussion on this panel discussion about whether or not things are funnier if they come from the same ethnic group, if the same ethnic group is insulting their own. And are they revealing an underlying truth? And this same reaction came out of the comedian Modi was just in Phoenix, Arizona this last Sunday. And he often makes fun of, Ashkenazim in his jokes, not offensively, but some people could be like, all right, he's piling on at this point. And it's just not necessary anymore. I think when we discuss the concept of free speech, we also lump in things like parody, and that is where the realm of comedy lies. And sometimes comedy's job is to make us uncomfortable, so therefore we can have a discussion afterwards. But sometimes comedians don't realize that their joke isn't funny. What is the rule of something being funny? It is only a joke if the other side laughs. If the other side does not laugh, then it is an insult. And comedians always are testing the boundaries. They're like race car drivers. They're trying to test the boundaries of what is funny and what is offensive. And some of our greatest Jewish comedians, Rabbi Jackie Mason, I should say, tests the boundaries of what was acceptable. As I mentioned before, Mel Brooks did. I'm trying to think of another comedian, and my coffee brain is not allowing me to do so. Lenny Bruce, at a time where the boundaries were not very wide of what was offensive and not offensive, tested the level, tested this boundary as a way of trying to figure out what a society was capable of discussing and not capable of discussing. Cindy.
Don Rickles.
Don Rickles.
He really pushed it.
I mean, I used to have a dream that people used to say, you've made it in Hollywood if Don Rickles was insulting you. People often felt that way. And Don Rickles was unapologetic about pushing those boundaries up until his dying day. And in his comedy in the 60s and in the 70s, he was particularly offensive to ethnic groups. And people didn't know. You could watch these panels on these roasts, and you could see some people laughing and some people not laughing. And that is always the fine line that comedy is going to walk. And we make that decision naturally by whether or not we laugh or not. And that is the point where we say whether or not we like a comedian and their style or don't like a comedian and their style. And it's it's sometimes a very personal thing. And sometimes back to the original question of whether or not these jokes, come from people who are like us, who are like-minded or like practicing or even like looking, is it more acceptable if they do something more offensive? You'll know immediately upon whether or not you react in a way. And maybe sometimes they are revealing something that maybe needs to be discussed. When in discussing what Dave Chappelle was, and I've talked a lot about, you want to talk about something I've talked into the ground over the last 4 months. I've talked more about Dave Chappelle's monologue on Saturday Night Live than anything else. As part of the intro, I've had a lot of communal discussions about Kanye West, Kyrie Irving, and Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle was testing us, in my opinion. I think he was testing us to see whether or not we would have a discussion about some of the things that we need to have discussions about. I'm not saying he was pushing a stereotype as a truth. He was saying, hey, there are these perceptions out there by a lot of people on both sides, because during that monologue, he actually attacks both Jews and Blacks in that monologue. And he's saying to both sides, you need to talk about these things. Some people will find this funny and some people will find it offensive, but the underlying truth is that we need to talk. And nothing's going to get resolved. In this last source, just to not to put it up, we don't need to put it up. I'm just going to paraphrase it. That two rabbis come across, Rabbi Baroka and Rabbi and Elijah come across two people, just having fun and revelry in a town square, and he asked what your occupation is, and some people are laughing and enjoying, and some people are not, and he asked their occupation, and it says jesters, and and says, well, that's a fine occupation to have, because at times the attempt of a jester is to bring peace amongst the people. Now that peace arrives in various different ways. It arrives by, one, everybody enjoying in the fun and laughing and saying, ha, 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 this is a fun moment we can all enjoy together. Or peace sometimes as a tough road to walk of revealing some things that need to be discussed, some lessons that need to be learned. And this is sometimes the amazing role that comedy can play. So that's my opinion on both of those things, because I think we need to pay attention. Sometimes if we just run away from things that bother us, then we don't have the teachable moment. We need to acknowledge it, see it, understand it, and then say, okay, what's the real issue here? And that's what I've been trying to get people to come to with the whole Dave Chappelle thing. And even with moments on Seinfeld, maybe there was a different issue. Like I was talking about it earlier today, the anti-dentite, episode, I can't believe he's an anti. It's not offensive, but they're really trying to get you to talk about something else there. There's really a hidden message there. And making out during Schindler's List, everyone's going to have a different reaction, and that can lead to a discussion. I'm not saying one side is right or one side is wrong, but I'm a person that is always about having the discussion. And I think comedy, I think Seinfeld, I think a lot of comedic adventures over the years have led us to have some really deeper conversations about real serious issues. It's the set induction. It's the hook that gets us in to having the discussion. Because most of the time, as we see in society today, when we're met with the blunt force of the issue, everybody retreats to their corners and says, I've got my side, you've got your side, I'm not talking to you. But sometimes the comedy brings us together and says, all right, this is, yeah, we laughed or it didn't laugh. Why? Let's talk about it. Let's have the discussion. We've broken the ice now. And I think that's an important lesson that we have to take away from a lot of comedy. I do want to take an opportunity to open up to other questions that people might have, or comments or thoughts. Rachel.
Interestingly, just when you mentioned Dave Chappelle, I was going to say, for me, that was extremely offensive. I watched that and I guess I couldn't believe he was saying the things that he was saying on national TV. You know,
Mhm.
I was taken aback really strongly. I felt very, very, very much offended by his commentary. And it's interesting you mentioned Jackie Mason too, because he, of course, is the ultimate Jewish kvetcher, you know, pointing out how our little idiosyncrasies and all that. And I was about to type in Jackie Mason when you mentioned Jackie. And I was about to type in Dave Chappelle when you started with Dave Chappelle. That's very
And
interesting.
Rachel, your point about Dave Chappelle is very well taken, but my addition to that is it's important to talk about these moments when we feel offended. And I think that's what Dave Chappelle was trying. This is what I think. I think Dave Chappelle was trying to push everyone to that. You know, Dave Chappelle once said something in a comedy sketch where he said, I mean, this is the same Dave Chappelle that ripped Jesse Smollett in a comedy, in a stand-up comedy routine that is like he ripped him, like just ripped him. But he also said in one comedy sketch, he said, you know, forget the Million Man March. If you want to see a million black men march, tell them all to send checks to their single moms.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of black people who were really offended by that. Yeah. But he explained, I was trying to get you to have a discussion like about this. Why is it that I'm saying something like this? Why is it that I have a perception like this? And I think in that monologue, Dave Chappelle was really pushing at two very, he was pushing at both, trying to get both sides to understand that there are some real serious issues that we need to discuss here. Laura, you had your hand up. I want to be sure to get to you.
There we go. Hi. In following up with the question I had about does it matter whether a writer of the jokes is Jewish or black or and so forth? Do you react differently? I had a discussion with somebody a few years ago, I think, but it had to do with a comedian who had performed in front of a Jewish audience. And so we were talking about the appropriateness of some of the jokes, and we thought, is it more appropriate because you're in the room with other Jews and you can laugh more freely, or by taking the Jewish jokes into the public, does that give more fodder for anti-Semitism to others out there? So is it better to hold back when you're in public, or is it okay to do perform that way?
Or do jokes when you're sitting comfortably with people of your similar ethnic group? Does it perpetuate dangerous stereotypes that you don't want your group to perpetuate? And you just people sit there and they just let it happen.
Yep. That's true.
And it's maybe not necessarily about an outside reaction, but really kind of stopping in inward and outward growing, cementing of stereotypes of perceptions that we actualize because we make light of it. And I agree. But what does it lead to? My ultimate point is, what should it lead to? Mm-hmm. A discussion. I always say in everything that I do as an educator, my job is not always to give the answers. My job is to start another discussion and hope that you go home and continue to discuss these. If I had all the answers, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I'd be doing something else. If I had all the answers, I'd be sitting in Vegas right now, not here, not in Scottsdale, Arizona even. I would be, I'd be doing something else. Sheila.
I
Thank
think
you.
a lot of this, I like your comment about Dave Chappelle and the others, that they are trying to get us to discuss something. But what I have noticed, my husband used to tell me, sometimes even when he would visit people in the hospital or at a funeral, he would repeat the jokes that the stories that the people were telling. But some people would be very upset about it. You go into a hospital room and you're trying to make, cheer the person up, but you will have a nurse or something who just can't understand. Why aren't you serious? The man is very sick. He is dying. And they just can't appreciate that. Yeah, if I'm dying, then why can't I have some enjoyment before I die? And I think Jews feel freer. And probably Black people also will tell those jokes. We look at things, I think certain ethnic groups look at things differently. They're not shocked. Oh my God, you're not serious about, what's happening in front of you.
You're right. You should hear the jokes. I've heard the jokes that Jews tell about other jokes. Look what Jews as a community sometimes tell jokes about. I've heard more intensely insulting Polish jokes from within the Jewish community than outside of the Jewish community. You should also hear some of the jokes that are said within, some of the jokes that are said within the Black community. Woo, like sharp, and would take your breath away. But what they're doing is sometimes they're calling about a perspective that needs to be discussed. We shouldn't leave it hanging. And the reason why some people react so sharply is because they want to put out the fire of a perception that could quickly become a reality. And particularly within the Black community, we have to be careful that some of the things that we discuss from a comedic standpoint, there are a lot of jokes by Black comedians that portray Black men as incredibly sexually aggressive people. And there's a lot of pushback over the years, because that's a perception that's now grown out of control, or just Black men as aggressive people in general. And that is a perception that's gone out into the public and become a dangerous thing. And that we now have to have a discussion about to try to roll back. So when Dave Chappelle says something about Jews controlling Hollywood, our reaction shouldn't just be anger. Anger could be, or disappointment or insult, can be legitimate reactions. But the next step must be is, why is it that people have this perception of us, and what do we do about it? Why don't people see that the Jewish community is very philanthropic, that that synagogue and churchgoers all together in America give more to charities and do more charitable work than any group of Americans, or any other group around the world? We have to have that discussion, because there's a perception out there that must be discussed, and we have to do something about it. We have to do something about it quick. There's an old business saying, their perception is your reality. And you have to do something about their perception really quick. If you have an angry customer, their perception is that your business is really bad. So you have to do something about perceptions. And sometimes these comedians are drawing us to understand perceptions that can grow to be very dangerous things, as the Jewish community has seen. And so is the Black community. Every community has seen it, has seen these dangerous things go undiscussed. And so they just keep staying in the realm of being a joke until we do something about it, until we change the reality. So they can be wonderful discussion starters. I want to end it there. I want to thank all of you for listening to the ramblings of this sleep-deprived man, fresh off of his birthday. I've been rambling so long, Rabbi Foster has fallen asleep next to me. That's not true. He's wide awake. He's answering all of his emails. He's emailing Rabbi Hal right now about, I think we should never invite this guy again, as a scholar in residence. So, but I want to thank all of you for taking the time, and having an open discussion and sharing your memories and sharing your humor and your thoughts on humor. I hope to see some of you this weekend at the Shabbaton and spend some time discussing other things and everything with you, in life in general, and I'll be sharing some other thoughts, and some experiences as the weekend goes on. Thank you.